You're listening to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast, a place for sex addicts to share their experiences of recovery, to help break the stigma, myths, and misconceptions of sex addiction. This podcast may contain topics of sexuality, sexual trauma, dysfunction, or other things that may be triggering, so listener discretion is advised. Hello, and welcome to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. My name is Jason, I'm a sex addict, and I will be your podcast host for today. What's going on, everyone? Welcome to episode number 66 of the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. This week, I have the honor of sharing the story of Christine C. from Indiana. She spoke at the most recent SAA and COSA Speaker meeting that we do here in the Bay Area, and this was about a month ago. And after getting the recording links, I'm grateful to be sharing her story on the podcast. So I know that Christine does a lot of service work in SAA, including sponsors helping sponsors SAA's Zoom meeting. And I will mention this more at the end of the episode and provide links in the show notes. But there are quite a few recordings from the past couple of years of these sessions, and they are available for us to listen to. Christine does attend one of the meetings that I attend on Zoom as well, and I know her from that. And hopefully in the future I can have her on the podcast as a full-time guest where we can have a back and forth conversation. But the recording from this past SAA and COSA speaker meeting was absolutely beautiful, heart-touching, and amazing. Listening back to this recording, I was trying to find a theme or something that I could pick out for a reading. And it just so happens at my noon meeting today that someone read the reading from Answers in the Heart from September 1st. And that's when I'm recording this. And I wanted to use that for the reading on this episode. And it says, "Even the cry from the depths is an affirmation. Why cry if there's no hint of hope of hearing?" And that is from Martin Marty. "What happens to a girl who doesn't get the help she needs from her parents? What becomes of a boy who reaches out time and again to parents who don't respond to his needs? What kind of life awaits the victim of childhood sexual abuse who has no one to turn to for help? We know some of the answers to those questions because, for many of us, our childhoods included suffering alone in silence. Help was asked for, but never received. Trust was betrayed when we reached out. We can't condemn ourselves if we have a hard time asking for help. Healing is a process. Trusting is a process. Risking is a process. We can reach out only as much as we are able to this moment. We must trust that through our recovery, over time, our sense of dignity and clarity will be reestablished. Day by day, we will find ourselves better able to ask for what we need." The meditation, "My wounds from the past do not have to be fully healed in order for me to start anew." And after hearing that in my noon meeting today, I can really see how it related to Christine's story. Hearing about her childhood was devastating, listening to her speak. But in this reading, I find hope for anyone that has been a victim of childhood sexual abuse or not having parents that they can turn to for help. So I'm grateful that I was able to hear this reading and share it here on the podcast. Before turning it over to the conversation, I just wanted to briefly mention that I have been working on a friend's podcast this week as a co-host, and I will get into that in a little bit. So a lot of my time this week has been dedicated to recording on that podcast. And so I was grateful that I had these recordings from the speaker meeting to be able to share. Some people in my regular meetings have heard me share about the nervousness that I felt about co-hosting one of my friend's podcasts when he had the chance to interview the widow of famed metal singer Ronnie James Dio and the directors of a documentary that is about Dio's life. And I will be sharing a little bit more about that at the end of this episode. There was a song in there that was just so touching, and I really feel that it relates a lot to recovery and wanted to put that here at the end of the podcast. Anyway, so my time and energy has really been focused on that interview this week. And we just finished recording intros and outros for that episode. And right now, I am grateful that I have this episode to be able to share with everyone. I'm now ready to turn it over to that recording. And the recording didn't cover Frank, who is her husband, doing an introduction to Christine speaking. So she makes reference to Frank right at the beginning. And so that was just after he had finished speaking. And now I'm ready to turn it over to the recording of Christine at the SAA and COSA speaker meeting. Here it is. I hope you enjoy it.
I want to first thank Frank for that beautiful introduction, and thank you to Michael for inviting me to be a person in the program to share my story. I'm going to get distracted here really quickly if I can't have a moment here to myself. Hang tight 1 second. I have an agenda that I created for tonight, and before I jumped onto the meeting, I started to talk to my higher power about, how to begin what I want to share with everyone. And if I sound a little scattered, I apologize. I have had a really, really rough couple of days, and something happened between Frank and I today that I'm going to share that you'll understand here why it's been such a tough day for us. But I want to tell you what brought me to SAA. Frank mentioned in his lead that I'm an incest survivor, which is true. My oldest brother started to molest me when I was 3 years old, and did that every day, almost every day, until I was 16. So I think that I was predispositioned to become a sex addict, but working the steps, I discovered that that wasn't really what was causing the problem for me. When I was born, I wasn't wanted. My mom had 7 children, and she didn't really want any of us, and told me to my face 5 times in my life that she didn't want me when I was born. And let me tell you, that's a hard thing for a child to hear. It was a hard thing for an adult. And when I was adult, the last time she told me that, I was 50 years old, which was 8 years ago. So it was really difficult for me dealing with the abandonment more than anything. I think even the sexual abuse, knowing that I was never going to get my needs met by my mom. So another thing that happened that really set me up for failure as a human being to be able to know how to love is when I was 22, I was engaged to a guy who was 38 at the time. My mom would have been 52. And we were together probably 3 years. And after we broke up, a month later, I found out that my mom had been having a sexual relationship with that man for 6 months behind my back. She ultimately divorced my dad and married that man, and he's been my stepfather for the last 30 years. To say that my family's dysfunctional is an understatement. Everything in our house was inappropriate. My mom's 3 brothers were all pedophiles. They all molested their oldest daughters. My dad's 2 brothers were womanizers. None of them were faithful to their wives. So you could say that in our family that everything sexual was anything goes. And so I learned that as a child and then growing up. So what I wanted to talk about tonight, what brought me to SAA, not just that I was having a lot of sexual problems. I didn't even think at the time I was an addict. That was a word I struggled with a lot. I just was extremely sexual, and how could I not be? How could I not be? It was, since I've been in this program, I call myself an unpaid prostitute because in my behaviors, I would have several men dangling on a string. I was never alone. I always had somebody. The longest I had ever been in between a relationship was 5 months in my entire adult life. Been married twice. I was never faithful to them or any man that I was with. So trying to figure out what healthy sexuality is, what love looks like, what it means to have dignity and honor were things that were words that were foreign to me. Just sitting here thinking of that introduction that Frank gave, and it was emotional to hear him get emotional about all the things that he thinks about me that are so great, because my life has been a shambles. It's been a wreck. I'm a broken, wounded, damaged individual that is lucky to be alive because all of the abuse that I've suffered. I was suicidal twice in my life. How I ever survived and didn't become a serial killer, I have no idea. By the grace of my higher power, I guess. What I want to focus my share on tonight is what it looks like for people like Frank and myself to be wrestling with this addiction as a victim, and then as a person who has wounded others this way. How do we develop a healthy relationship that has intimacy, which neither one of us really know what that is? We're trying to learn. And then how to be honest about what's going on, even though it's painful, and how to work through our multitudes of problems that have transpired since we've been together. I want to share some of the incidents that we've dealt with. I want to also talk about when he said, that we just keep coming back. What he meant by that was we keep coming back to each other, and we keep coming back to the God of our understanding to try to help us to work through these issues, because both of us are extremely damaged human beings, and we're trying to figure it out as we go. So one of the things that has really made it hard for me to be open to the whole concept of intimacy is how the abuse from my childhood, the impact that had on me as a human being. Obviously, I don't trust. It's very difficult for me to trust another person, especially a man. I became very cynical. My sense of humor was very sardonic and sarcastic. I was a very hateful, bitter, angry person that had every reason in the world to use and abuse people, which I did. I used to live in the mindset that I didn't care who I hurt along the way, and if I saw them crying, I would laugh in their face, because I was so incapable of connecting with human beings because of what I'd been through. It's a work in progress with my family. I've tried over the last 7 years to develop a relationship with my mother, which is incredibly strained. And I still, after all this time, don't know how she fits into my life. My dad passed away a year ago. I didn't have a relationship with him either. So it's just been a really difficult adulthood. One of the things that I did a lot for 20 years was I just moved. I would find a different guy. I would pick up my life. I would move out of state. That would fall apart, and then I would move back, or I would find somebody else and go move with him. It was just constant. I did that constant. I moved so many times. I can't even tell you how many times I moved. For me to be settled into a place that I call home, that I'm proud to be, is miraculous. In my addiction, there was a lot of one night stands. I would meet a person on social media, and within an hour we would be acting out, and I never knew their names a lot of times. Yeah, that was commonplace for me. And I didn't think there was anything wrong with that. Actually, before I joined SAA, I had already been in 4 other 12-step programs. My first 12-step program was in 1992, Survivors of Incest Anonymous. I met somebody there who helped me to find my way to adult children of alcoholics and dysfunctional families. And from there, I was introduced to Al-Anon, and I went to ACA and Al-Anon every week for years. And what I didn't do was I didn't find a sponsor in either program. I went to meetings faithfully. I listened to people talk about their stories. I would share at meetings about how much I hated the world and everybody in it. And I was always so surprised that nobody, not one person, ever stood up and said, Christine, you can't talk like that in here. You're going to have to leave. Nobody ever, ever, ever asked me to leave when I was so volatile. Frank, early on in our relationship, came up with a nickname for me. He started calling me the Shredder because I am so quick to just tear the crap out of people when I get upset. And so I have a lot of things about old Christine that just slip right back out of me, even though I've been sober since May 25th of 2017, which for a person like me, I never thought was possible. I still get angry very quickly. Frank will be the first person to tell you that he has to walk very carefully around me when I'm angry. The good thing is that I'm painfully aware of this behavioral issue, and I ask my higher power a lot to help me with this problem. I recently started going to CoDA for codependency issues, and Frank and I are in Recovering Couples Anonymous. We are working the steps together as a couple. Both of us should be attending COSA meetings because we are both partners of sex addicts. If we had more time in the day, we probably would be doing that also. I know that there's not a lot of people that I know in recovery that are willing to do some of the things that I've done to try to get healthy. I made my recovery a full-time job. I treated it like I had to do this and my life depended on it. And what I mean by that is I put 30 to 40 hours a week into my program. In that 30 to 40 hour week, I work full time also, and I've got a very busy life. I would go to 3 to 4 1-hour meetings a day. Back before COVID, I was driving to these meetings, which is an hour one way. I did anywhere from an hour worth of step work a day, minimally 10 minutes. But when I started to journal, I would spend a lot of time doing that. I listened to a lot of podcasts and TED Talks related to whatever I was working on with whatever step. Outreach calls. My sponsor didn't force me, but made it very clear that that was very important to do. And I kicked and screamed my way through that, because one of the things I've learned with intimacy avoidance is I in early in SAA and in all of my recovery. I just didn't care about human beings. I just couldn't listen to people talk on the phone and care about their problems and hear what they were saying and show up in the moment and be present and give feedback. It was so awkward and uncomfortable for me to have a conversation with somebody, even for 10 minutes, because everything in the back of my mind was going, so, and what's your point? Why are you telling me this? I mean, I just did not have the ability to just be. So learning intimacy for me as a human being was difficult. And so in my relationship, it's been really tough to do. I'm sure if Frank was sharing with you some of the stories of things that we've been through, he would tell you the same thing, how difficult that it's been for both of us to try to not only figure out what intimacy is, but what does healthy sexuality look like? I can tell you early on in our relationship, we did a lot of behaviors that were what I would consider middle circle or pretty close to inner circle because we just didn't know any other way. And it made it really difficult for us to try to rewrite a different language around what that would look like for us as a couple. One of the issues that we wrestled with and still do is I would try to find my voice to tell Frank something that's going on that I'm struggling with or uncomfortable with, or it seems emotionally painful, or it's triggering, or I just don't like it, or I don't know how to say no. I mean, there were so many things going on. And I was so, at the beginning, I was so afraid because of my fear of abandonment. If I tell Frank how I feel, he's going to run. He's going to tell me he can't deal with this. He doesn't want to be in this relationship with me. I'm going to be abandoned again. So I would very reluctantly and carefully, walking on eggshells, like I'm walking through a landmine, I would try to tell him something. And he has fear of rejection issues. I don't want to take his inventory, but he would react unfavorably to the truth that I just said. And then I would immediately get mad because of his reaction, and then this vicious circle. And then, oh my gosh, this was going on all the time. And so in our couples therapy, with our couple sponsor, not therapy, but in our meetings, we've learned a lot over this last couple of years about me not being so demanding and so intense and so finger pointing or whatever, and him being stronger and less reactionary. And so we're trying to work through a lot of that. And one of the victories, I'll tell you, just happened today. And I'm going to tell you a couple of stories of some things that we've been through. We went and we cut a load of wood and brought it back to my house. And we were in the process of stacking wood behind my shed. And Frank brought a load of wood in a wheelbarrow, and I was standing there bent over, kind of trying to move some wood around, and he dumped the wheelbarrow before I could move quick enough, and the wood landed on my foot, and he almost broke my foot. Let me tell you, the old Christine would have called him every name in the book, probably, shamed him beyond belief for being so mindless and careless. And it would have ruined the entire weekend and probably would have ruined the next month, because I would have held it over his head and said, how could you? And all the things that my dad would have said to me, like my dad would say to me, why are you so stupid? Why can't you think before you act? What's wrong with you? When are you going to get this right? How many times do I have to tell you? I mean, my mind just goes back to all of that in the way that I was brought up. And instead of doing that, I did say to him, when he said to me, what can I do? What can I do? I said, you could really stop being so mindless. And I caught myself right there going, oh no, I don't want to talk to Frank this way anymore. So he helped me into the house and got my foot on an ice pack. And I sat there just fuming inside, like, what in the name do I have to do to not let this ruin my weekend, because we've been having a pretty rough time here lately. And I just asked him to go outside and do something else. And while he's outside, I prayed. And then I called a program friend, which I needed to talk to somebody. So I used a tool of the program. And they really helped me to get past what happened. And he came back into the house right at the tail end of our conversation. And he sat down beside me, and as I hung up the phone with my program friend, I was thinking about what just happened, and I started to say, our higher power must really have a sense of humor because, and I went to turn to tell him what I was going to say, and I hit my freaking foot on the leg of the table. And I'll tell you what, I started crying. I am just like bawling my eyes out going, oh, all I want to say is why, and what I've learned in my program is I don't ask why anymore. And I just kept saying, what are you trying to teach me, higher power? What are you trying to teach me about what's going on right now? And because of my attitude about knowing that I want to be the kind of person that loves, that forgives. It's so hard sometimes. I want to be the kind of person that lives the concepts of this program. SAA has changed my life so dramatically, I can't even express to you how transformed I am from that old, awful, hateful, ranting and raving lunatic that I used to be, and wanting so desperately to help people understand that you don't have to live in that place anymore. I'm not saying life got easy for Christine, because it didn't. Life happens, problems happen, relationships happen, pain happens, disappointment happens. And one of the things I'm going to say about disappointment that I've learned, this anger that rises up inside of me. And I was just talking to Frank about this earlier today. Anger is a cover-up emotion, and what it constantly is covering up for me is disappointment. I am so disappointed so much because I'm 58 years old. I joined SAA when I was 52, and I say to people all the time, I never in my life thought that I could get to this age and still not have it figured out. Why is life so hard? Why are relationships so tough? Why is recovery so difficult? Why can't it get any easier? I mean, all this stuff is like, I just want so much for life to be sweet and lovely and carefree and glorious and all these things. And sometimes it is. Sometimes it's not. I say to people all the time, recovery is like the weather. Some days it's hurricane, hailstorms, and other days it's really nice and breezy and sunny. And that's how it is in my life, and I try to remember, like today's a perfect example. Frank almost broke my foot, and we ended up having a beautiful, connecting, wonderful rest of the day. We decided to just go out to dinner or lunch. It was like 2:00. And we sat there and we told stories. We reminisced about funny things from childhood, and just spent the next couple of hours trying to connect with each other in a place that the anger could have never took us. How did that happen? Is it because I'm perfect? Is it because he's, Mr. Wonderful? No, it's because higher power answered our prayer. That's all I can say, is that when we ask, and it's sometimes hard to remember to ask, but when we do, the spirit of our higher power shows up, and some things happen between us that we can't even explain. So that's one of the things that happened here today that I can honestly say, because we decided to turn it over, it made things better. Doesn't always work that way, but it did today. There was another time, the same thing happened a couple of weeks ago. We don't live in the same city. Frank lives in Indianapolis in Indiana, and I live in Fort Wayne in Indiana, which is about a 2.5 hour drive away. And so we only see each other on the weekends. I spent the first winter at his place. We cohabitated because of COVID, and then we tried that again this last winter, and I decided I really wasn't comfortable with that. So we only see each other on the weekends probably now until we decide if we're going to ever live together, which I don't know when that's going to be. But he wanted me to go down. I had a friend of mine down there that I wanted to celebrate their birthday, and I didn't want to go because I didn't want to spend the weekend down there because I'm very busy in the summer with things I do at my own place. And I remember driving down, we were talking to our couple sponsor on the phone, and I just kept telling him, I just don't want to go. I don't want to have any more problems. We've had so many problems the last 3 or 4 weekends in a row. Can't I just get a break from this? I just don't want to do this. And so I ended up just praying the whole way down there for understanding of what it is that, I needed guidance, and I just didn't know what to do with my bad attitude. And by the time I got there, I was feeling better, and we ended up having a beautiful weekend. And one of the things that was so interesting that happened this particular time was there's been a couple of times in our relationship where we've decided to be celibate. Because of our sex addiction issues, we have such a difficult time trying to sort it out. And for us to try to have romance and activities in the bedroom when we're having these kind of difficulties, it's almost impossible. So we've decided to just take a break from it and really work through our communication and codependent problems. And we ended up having a real beautiful sensory experience with each other that was very romantic without the romance, if you know what I mean. And what we found is every time we ask higher power to help us with this kind of a connection, something amazing happens with us when we can actually show up with each other in that mindset. So I would encourage everybody, if you don't do it, invite higher power into your relationship with your partner, because it's just incredible what happens. So that happened with us a couple of weekends ago. I'll tell you a funny story. The first, back in 2020, we started dating in February. It was on Valentine's Day, actually. It's so funny. Valentine's Day is our anniversary now forever. But July the 5th, the day after 4th of July festivities, we were having some communication problems, is to say it really nicely. It was pretty horrendous. And I was so angry with him. I wanted to end the relationship. I just didn't want to go forward with it anymore. We had been having so much trouble, even early in the relationship. I took off down the sidewalk and just started walking away. And I was praying and crying and stomping my feet and angry and just venting. And I ended up a couple of blocks away from the house, and it was probably the hottest day of the summer. And I sat on this park bench on the side of the road and just in a fit, not knowing what the right thing to do is. And I was sitting on this park bench, and there was a car that pulled up to the stop sign in front of me, and they sat there for the longest time because they were looking over at me, and I'm obviously a mess. I got red face, crying, and I probably looked a fright. And they finally drove off, and I said, higher power, you're going to have to bring me an angel. You're going to have to bring me an angel, because I want to just crawl under a rock and die right now. And I look up, and Frank walked right around the corner, and I was like, this is not the angel I was asking for. Oh my God. And so he apologized, and we walked back to the house hand in hand and just crying. And I think we even walked in silence, just not knowing what to do. And we ended up on our knees, both of us, before the God of our understanding, just wailing out in this guttural prayer of, what do you want from us? Did you bring us together? What's the purpose for this? What are you trying to prepare us to do, or who to be? And it was just really You talk about vulnerability. I'll tell you what, I don't know if I've ever had a time in my life with a partner where I've been able to be that vulnerable and that honest and that spiritual during a real crisis in the relationship. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, and I don't know how I'm doing on time. I feel like I'm just rambling from place to place. Does anybody know how much time I have left? I'm okay. Thanks, Michael. What I'm trying to say is, and this is something that I've learned very recently in my own journey, not just in my own sex addiction recovery, but in our couples relationship recovery, because of my brokenness, I don't really know how to make a healthy commitment to somebody. In my acting out, if the guy didn't please me or didn't do what I asked him to do, or there was too much difficulty, I said, hasta mañana. Next. I couldn't care less. I was so disconnected from humanity that I just couldn't understand what it was, what that picture looked like, to have someone that I could honor and respect and have my own self-respect and self-esteem so that I could build a relationship. I built sexuality. That's all I did. And I had no idea how to do anything else. And so I'm learning this in our coupleship. And I told Frank the other day that I don't know how to commit to a human being in love. I just don't know how to do it. And I've often said to people that I'm not relationship material. I just am not. I don't have the skill set to have the tolerance and the patience and the level of compassion and empathy that it takes, and the level of willingness to want to put up with someone else's BS, for lack of better words, just because of my life journey. And Frank has been so incredibly patient with me, knowing he knew my inner circle before we ever started dating. I mean, we were brothers and sisters in the program. We knew each other's histories. We understood, and we were, there for each other in the program. And, to try to take what we knew and turn it into something workable was extremely difficult. It still is. I'm one of those women, like most women, I think, in our program. Their spouse starts to tell them about something they did that was triggering or acting out. And I'm like, I don't want to hear that. Oh my God, what are you doing? So we had this problem early on where I had to say to him and set a boundary. You're going to have to call one of your brothers, dude. I can't listen to this anymore. I mean, I love you and I hear you, and yes, I'm a sister, and I can usually hear this kind of stuff, and it's water off a duck's back. It's in ear one, ear out the other, but you are my companion. You are my confidant. You're the guy that I have romance with. I don't want to hear what you're thinking about with other people. Tell someone that you can tell that's not going to be something I can't ever get out of my brain again. So I'm just like every other partner. I don't think that it's the place of a partner to be telling their spouse or whatever what they're doing. I just think that should be a sacred space. That's my personal opinion for being kept in the program with a accountability partner. Thank you. I saw that. So what I'm learning in this program for victories is I've decided that Frank and I are always going to have problems. We're always going to have communication issues, and that is just okay. We're probably going to have these for the rest of our life, and that is just the way it's going to be. And I'm okay with that because of what's been happening in my own recovery. Just resolute to the fact that higher powers got this anyway. It's nothing I got everything to do with it. If I can just remember to turn it over, I do really well. And we come back to each other, and we grow, and we love, and we learn, and we stay, and we keep coming back. That line right there, I just said today, this 4-word prayer that I say to people all the time, and I'll leave this with you because this is what it measures up to for me. Bless Frank and change me. Bless Frank and change me. And I say that to people all the time. And it works when I can put myself into that kind of humility, and I've been crying about it all day. I want his life to be beautiful, whether I'm in it or not. And I want to change and be the person that my higher power wants me to be. And I've never been so desperate for anything in my life but that. So thank you so much, Michael, for the invitation. Thanks, everybody, for letting me share. I hope there was something here that somebody could take from and use in your own recovery. I appreciate all of you for being here. Thank you.
Wow, such an inspiring story. I was so moved by that. I was so grateful to be at that Zoom meeting, to hear her speak, and grateful to be able to share that here on the podcast. So at the beginning of this episode, I did talk about how Christine has done a lot of service, and the item that I mentioned was called Sponsors Helping Sponsors, and I wanted to read this. Sponsors Helping Sponsors, a Zoom meeting of Sex Addicts Anonymous. The following recordings are podcast archives from 2020 to 2022. In each recording, there are several SAA sponsors discussing a wide variety of topics related to how to become an SAA sponsor and how each sponsor handled various situations they dealt with, helping people work the 12 steps of SAA. The categories, steps 1 through 13, abstinence, books and resources, boundaries, 3 circles, confidentiality, cross-gender sponsoring, dating, dishonesty, healthy behavior, illegal behavior, new sponsees, prayer and meditation, relapses, singles, slogans, sponsee challenges, sponsee issues, sponsees now sponsoring, sponsor concerns, sponsor support, step work maintenance, substance abuse, unwillingness, and victories. And there are several recording links, and I will do my best to leave information on how to find all of those recordings in the show notes for this episode. And I'm so grateful for Christine doing all the service that she does for this program. So moving from that into what I was talking about at the beginning of the episode, where I had the opportunity to interview Wendy Dio, Don Argot, and Demian Fenton, working on a documentary about Dio's life. And just for some background, Ronnie James Dio was the singer from Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow, Black Sabbath, and his own band Dio. And at the end of the documentary is a song by Dio that is on the piano. The song is called This Is Your Life. And at the point it plays in the documentary was right there at the end. If anyone doesn't know, Ronnie James Dio died of stomach cancer in 2010. And the documentary covers this as his widow is visiting his grave. This song is playing. And I'm getting a little choked up talking about it. Anyway, the song is just so beautiful and inspiring, and is definitely something that belongs in my recovery playlist. And I wanted to play a little of that for everyone here.
Who cares what came before? We're only starlight. Once upon a time, all the world was blind like we are. This is your life, this is your time. Look at your world, this is your life.
Such an inspiring song. Beautiful. And watching the documentary actually made me tear up at that point. And there was another song that I discovered this week that I wanted to talk about briefly. I've talked about it in the past that I've been watching a lot of YouTube reaction videos, and I get turned on to a lot of new music. And one of the videos that I watched this week was covering a song by Avi Kaplan. I think that's how you pronounce it. He is known as the bass vocalist in the a cappella group Pentatonics. And the song is called All Is Well, which features Joy Williams. And she is the female vocalist from the band The Civil Wars. And unfortunately, that band is no longer together. but their voices are just amazing on the song. I had never heard this before until just yesterday and thought it was inspiring, so I wanted to play this on the podcast as well.
I've landed in the light. My eyes could finally see the darkness in my mind was the path to set my spirit free. All is well, all is well. Heaven, hell, wherever I go, all is well in my soul, all is well.
It's the smoke, it's the flame, it's the ash and it's the rain, it's the burn you wash away, it's the change and it's the same.
Such a beautiful, beautiful song. So this and the Dio song, This Is Your Life, really affecting my emotions this week, and really, really love it. That's about all I have for this week. I haven't received much new feedback for the podcast. I may have had a few comments on YouTube videos and on Apple Podcasts, iTunes reviews, but I will save those for another time. Like I mentioned, I've spent a lot of my focus this week working on my friend's podcast. The people at some of my meetings have heard that I've been feeling a little bit nervous this week and trying to keep my emotions in check, working the 10th step around some of those emotions that I was feeling has, really kept me grounded. So anyway, really grateful for that opportunity. So if you do want to provide feedback for the podcast, you can reach us at feedback@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com. And again, if you want to reach me personally, you can reach me at jason@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com. If you want to be a guest on the podcast or have any general questions about the podcast. That's all I have for this week. And like I mentioned last week, that the next couple of weeks, I will be sharing recordings from the past SAA and COSA speaker meeting. Next week, we will be sharing the recording from Teresa D. from Southern California, who is a member of COSA, and yet another extremely powerful share. And I can't wait to share that episode. Until then, I thank you so much for tuning in this week. And as always, keep coming back. The views and opinions contained in the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Bay Area Intergroup or the ISO of SAA.